This time here in Goss's Garage, we want to talk a little bit about a common problem that we see on some Ford trucks. Now, that problem is with spark plugs. Now, for a lot of you who own these problem trucks, you may get a letter in the mail, such as we have here, that explains that certain spark plugs have an issue and that they will reimburse you a certain amount of money for getting them repaired and so on. Now, let's see what the problem actually is. Now, this applies to 5.4 liter engines, and they range, I think, from 2004 to 2010. Now, the 5.4 liter engine, the 3-valve engine, they originally came with spark plugs such as we see here. Now, if we look at the end of this, we see that there's this long sleeve on the end of it. It's smooth, and it fit down into the engine or into the cylinder head, and the cylinder head is very close to this. Now, over time, what would happen was that carbon would build up between the cylinder head and this portion of the spark plug right here. So, when you went to take the spark plug out, what happened was very simple. This part down here is bound up in the cylinder. You put the wrench on it up here and you start turning it, and the bottom portion stays in the engine, the top portion comes out. Well, a lot of shops apparently don't know that there are tools that can be used to correct this. But before we go into that, we need to see what they have done to change these plugs. See, here we have the original one. Here we have a replacement, and if you look at this new design that we have here, very, very different in the way these plugs are fitted into the engine on later versions of this 5.4. So the big thing that you have to do if you're putting plugs in is that, number one, you have to be very careful with how you do this. You don't just wrench on them, and if they're stuck or feel tight, just give it more force. What you do is, if the plugs are bound up in the heads, what you do is you work the wrench back and forth very, very gently. And I've seen out in my shop here where we might take an hour to get one spark plug out, but that's still better than having it broken in the cylinder head. So you work it back and forth very, very gently. That will loosen up the carbon that has built around it, and usually, not always, but usually you can get it out. Now, one of the things you never ever do is use any kind of a power tool, whether it's electric or air, whatever it might be. You do not use a power tool on a spark plug, but especially not on one of these Ford spark plugs. Reason being is you, with your hand, can feel what's going on. The wrench, the power wrench, it can't feel anything at all. It just keeps cranking away until something breaks or strips or you got a problem. So always do it by hand, always do it gently, and most times you'll be able to get them out. All right, but suppose somebody has broken the plugs. Maybe it's you, maybe it's a shop or something. If you're in a shop, frequently what they do is they will use power tools. They just break them right off. We have a shop not too far from my shop here that consistently breaks every spark plug in the engine. And then what they do is they tell you that you need new cylinder heads, and thank you very much, that'll be $6,000. Well, the fact of the matter is that once these are broken, it really isn't a great big deal. And the reason that is right here. This is a kit that is designed specifically for removing those broken spark plugs out of Ford heads. And the way this works is pretty simple. You need a pair of long needle nose pliers, such as we have here, because once they're broken, you're going to have this little electrode that is down inside the broken part of the plug. You have to reach down in there with these pliers, pull this piece of electrode out. Once that's done, then you have a tool that will screw into the inside of this, and then using adapters, you can use it as a puller to pull that broken piece of metal out. So it's relatively simple. We normally, here in the shop, charge 1/2 hour per cylinder to do this, which even at that, if you have a 10-cylinder engine, you know, you're looking at 5 hours or $500 in labor to do this if all 10 of them were broken. Well, that's certainly a lot less expensive than $3,000, $4,000, $5,000, $6,000, where like some of these shops want. So remember, this is the tool right here. This one is made by Lyle. I presume there are other companies that make them, but it's designed specifically for these broken plugs. Now, the other thing to remember is when you put these plugs back in and put new ones in, what you do is you put a little bit of anti-seize compound, just a very small amount, on this portion right here so that it's not going to bind up in there again. The anti-seize will keep the carbon from building up in there, and it'll be slippery enough that when you go to take the plugs out, it will move freely. So you can save yourself a lot of grief and a lot of money just by following the rules here and knowing what is available out there. Now, if you have multiple broken plugs and you don't want to pay a shop, you could actually buy one of these kits and still save money in most cases. Just make sure you read the directions and follow them to the letter. And if you have a question or a comment, drop me a line at goss-garage.com.